Welcome. So now we are going to talk about aggregate equilibrium. So we're going to take aggregate demand, which is all of the demand for goods produced in this economy, and combine it with, or I guess interpose it against, short-run aggregate supply, which is the production in that country. Okay, so we have the demand and the production. Aggregate is super weird because the economy, quote unquote, right, whatever that means, is it extremely complicated, and everyone is both a producer and a consumer in the economy, right? A worker produces their labor and produces whatever things their labor is producing, and also is a consumer, right? And that's true of every single person, right? Every single person is both a producer and a consumer. So there are senses in which aggregate demand and aggregate supply are actually the same thing. But anyhow, we're going to simplify it a lot in this model where we're going to take away a lot of the noise and complexities and sort of pretend like we can understand what's going on. But it's interesting and you'll like it. Okay, so first we're going to talk about how to show phases of the business cycle on these graphs. Okay, and then we'll do shifters on these graphs. But first, let's start with the business cycle. This is really fun. Okay, so in the first graph that you're going to draw, right, you have your normal labels, price level, real GDP, short-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and you've titled it economy. Okay, so we're going to first draw this economy at long-run equilibrium. Okay, so this is long-run equilibrium. Okay, long-run equilibrium. So long-run equilibrium. Okay, so at long-run equilibrium, that means that the actual output of this economy, okay, which is indicated by the intersection of X of this X of short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So Y1, we'll call it, or Y actual. Okay. So this actual output of the economy and the current price level. Okay. So actual output equals what in the long run? We talked about this with the long-run aggregate supply graphs. Yeah, it equals YF. Okay, so in the long run, the actual production of the economy is going to equal the normal sustainable production of the economy, okay, which is YF. Okay, so Y1 equals YF in the long run, okay, in long run equilibrium. And that, because that means all the adjustments have happened, wages have adjusted for inflation, real profits are back to normal, real wages are back to normal, everything's back to normal. If you're rusty on that, go watch the first supply video again, aggregate supply video again. Okay, so if YF is here, what else is also here? Yeah, long run aggregate supply. The long run aggregate supply line always lines up with YF, so I'm going to draw that. Okay, and label it long run aggregate supply. Okay, so in long run equilibrium, the actual output of the economy, right, the intersection of SRAS and AD, is the same as the long-run sustainable productive capability of the economy, which is YF, which lines up with long-run aggregate supply. Okay, so make sure you understand those connections. Don't just memorize where the lines are. Okay, I promise you that will be a losing strategy. So make sure you understand, okay, how Y1 compares to YF. Okay, and it's pretty intuitive, right? Like this economy is just producing the normal amount that it should in the long run. Here we are. Okay. Cool. All right. So second thing. Okay. So on the second graph you're going to draw, and I would put this in your notes below the first graph you drew, you're going to want to draw these big enough that you can see what's going on pretty easily. Okay, so again, price level, real GDP, title it, economy, upward sloping short run aggregate supply, downward sloping aggregate demand. Okay, so they intersect. I'll give you a second to catch up and draw your graph. Nicely labeled. Okay, so the actual output is Y1. Okay. Y1, okay. The price level PL1, okay. And this economy, we'll do an economy in a recession, okay. So let's say this economy is in a recession, okay? You can't tell that just from looking at what we have so far, but in a recession, is production more or less than normal? Is production more or less than normal in a recession? Yeah, it's less, okay? So where should YF be to show that production is less than normal because we're in a recession? Okay, so production is less than normal. So YF needs to be greater than where we are now, because where we are now is less than normal production, okay? Long run aggregate supply always goes with YF. Okay? Okay, so we're going to put a bracket here between Y1 and YF, and we're going to call it a recessionary gap. Okay, and the recessionary gap is the amount of difference in real GDP because of the recession. Okay, so because of this recession, production is this much less than normal. That's the recessionary gap. Okay. All right, and then our last dealio here with the business cycle is going to be when production is greater than normal. Okay, so we have production is normal, production is less than normal, production is greater than normal. Okay, so we're going to call this an inflationary gap. Okay, an inflationary gap. Okay, so an inflationary gap is, we'll show it. Okay, I'll give you a second to catch up. So normal labels, right? Price level, real GDP, SRAS upward sloping, aggregate demand downward sloping, economy. Okay. All right, so an inflationary gap. Okay, so this production is greater than normal production. Okay, it's greater than normal production. So where's YF? Don't think of it as just the opposite of this. That's, again, a losing strategy because you won't always have this. Spoiler alert, okay? So just think about, okay, I have this output, but I know that this production is higher than normal. So I'm going to put normal production at a lower quantity. Okay? Because remember on an x-axis, this number is lower than this number. Okay? So this actual production is less than this, this potential production is less than this normal or this actual production. Okay, so this is an inflationary gap. Okay, inflationary gap, the amount of extra production that's happening that's unsustainable. Okay, so that's the inflationary gap. Okay, so these are our output gaps. Good job, guys.